Good evening, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I'm Hania Salah, Director of the Columbia Global Center in Amman. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here today as we delve into a critical discourse on the political economy of reform and the importance of safeguarding macrostability. We are honored to have with us Jordan's Minister of Finance, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Aissais, who brings with him a wealth of knowledge and expertise in navigating this intricate landscape. He will guide us through some key topics shaping Jordan's economy and share some insights on the country's economic positioning globally and domestically and the pivotal role of youth and women's inclusion. Dr. Al-Aissais recently participated in the 2023 spring meetings of the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund that took place in Washington, D.C. in April. And so we are eager to gain some valuable perspectives into the outcomes of those meetings, as well as the IMF review. We are also pleased to be joined by Lara Ayoub, who will moderate this evening's discussion. Before I turn the stage over to them, I would like to say a few words of introduction. Dr. Al-Aissais has served in a number of ministerial and advisory roles, including as Minister of Planning and International Cooperation, State Minister for Economic Affairs, Special Advisor, as well as Advisor for Economic Affairs to His Majesty King Abdullah, and Director of Economic and Social Development at the Office of His Majesty at the Royal Hashemite Court. Dr. Al-Aissais' experience in academia is extensive. From 2010 to 2016, he was an assistant professor and associate dean at the American University in Cairo, as well as a visiting lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School. He is also founding professor of the first massive Arabic course at Idrak. Minister Al-Aissais received 4 degrees from Harvard University, a PhD in economic development and public policy, 2 master's degrees in public administration, international development, and Middle Eastern studies, as well as a bachelor's degree in economics. Dr. Al-Aissais is a member of the Global Agenda Council at the World Economic Forum, a Fulbright scholar, and a published author on a range of topics, including the elasticity of trust, the impact of faith on economic behavior, and equity within economic policy. Today's moderator, Lara Ayoub, is a digital media strategist, consultant, and content creator. She's the co-founder of Sadaqah, a nonprofit organization that aims to increase female economic participation in Jordan. Lara has broad experience in media, having launched and operated the digital newsrooms of 3 TV stations and 2 print publications, including Al-Mamlaka TV, Ru'ya TV, and Al-Ghad newspaper. Lara has been an Eisenhower Fellow since 2017, is a recipient of the 2019 Goldman Sachs Fortune Global Women Leaders Award, and is an active member of the Vital Voices Global Leadership Network. She holds a master's degree in global media and digital cultures from SOAS University of London and a postgraduate certificate in journalism, innovation, and leadership from the University of Central Lancashire. Tonight's talk is titled, Navigating the Political Economy of Reform, Safeguarding Macrostability. It is a delicate balance requiring astute leadership, sound policies, and strategic decision-making. We are privileged this evening to hear from a visionary leader at the forefront of Jordan's economic policy making. Please join me in welcoming to the stage His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Aissais and Lara Ayoub. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hania, for the kind introduction and for Columbia University for inviting me to moderate this session. A very warm welcome, Your Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Aissais, Jordan's Minister of Finance, and a warm welcome to our audience today, and thank you for being here. I hope I can get through all the questions tonight, but I do want to leave room for the audience because I'm sure they are very eager to ask some pressing and challenging questions to you. You've been a Minister of Finance since 2019. During that time, we've witnessed 3 exogenous shocks, the pandemic, which you described as the biggest fiscal shock to hit any country in a century, and Russia-Ukraine, as well as stagflation, which is a new word that I just learned, actually. So as I prepared As I prepared for this session, I actually spoke with numerous people from multiple sectors and to better understand Jordan's from a fiscal perspective. And I realized that nearly everything related to finance and money is associated with you. People have different explanations when it comes, but they always point to you. So whether that's the case or not. So I thought it would be a great start off with a straightforward question and ask you, what does the Minister of Finance do exactly? What is his role and responsibilities, and which entities fall under your leadership? And maybe, what is the most misleading perception about your role, Your Excellency?
Thank you, Laura, and allow me to start by thanking Hania and this wonderful center that I personally am very proud sits in our good capital to bring intellectual discourse to all of us. Laura, I'm delighted you started with this question because very frankly, people enjoy making a voodoo doll out of the Minister of Finance, which often is well-deserved, but let's be very clear about what Minister of Finance does. The economy, any economy, has two levers, a fiscal lever and a monetary lever. These levers bring up and down the economy and adjust and protect it and safeguard it. The monetary lever is managed by our central bank, by the central bank of any country, and its tools are interest and safeguarding interest rate setting and safeguarding the peg to protect from inflation, what have you. Fiscal policy, which is managed by the Minister of Finance, has two tools, expenditure and revenue. So I work on deciding the expenditure of the overall budget of Jordan, the 10 billion, what each ministry gets, how they spend it, what gets allocated to whom, and where do we raise the money. And on the expenditure side, for better or for worse, reality is Jordan's expenditure is heavily dominated by salaries and interest payment, and therefore the maneuverability happens to be on the revenue side. And on the revenue side, you have mainly domestic sources of revenue, which are taxation, and you have two sources of revenue there, which are income taxes, what we call progressive. When we say progressive in economics, it means it hits the richer people equally or higher than it hits the middle class, so it's healthier from a social equity perspective. And we have regressive taxation, which is consumption tax, sales tax, which hits the middle class a little bit more. I decide on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. These, let me be very clear before I wrap up, these set the foundation for the economy. These don't decide how the economy perform, because as any house, if you throw the foundation but you don't build on it, it's just a lump of cement in the ground. But if the foundation is strong, sectors can raise their sectors and invest and develop for the betterment of their sectors and the economy. And therefore, it is my job to make sure the macro stability, the foundation, the safety for the private sector and citizens are there in place. I hope I didn't leave you more confused than when we started.
No, I think that gives us a good setup for today's conversation, so that because it was something that I wanted to understand better from you. And going to my next question is around the budget this year. So 63% of the general budget is spent on salaries, just like you mentioned, that it's a big chunk of the budget. So what are you capable of doing with the remaining as Minister of Finance? How do you prioritize expenses to enhance capital expenditure and ensure inclusive economic growth, which you always talk about?
So this is a very complex question, Laura. Just to be clear about our numbers, 63 of our current expenditure, which is 86 of our overall expenditure, is on salaries. So all in all, about 55 dinars out of every 100 dinars we spend go to salaries. By salaries, I mean salaries of existing workers, pensions, both civil service, security apparatus, and what have you. Add to it, 16% of our OPEX, of our operational cost, is interest rates of our debt portfolio. So these two are fixed. That leaves you with a small space, for better or for worse. That's how I found things when I came to Minister of Finance. That's how things are. That leaves you, for better or worse, a small room for maneuverability on the expenditure side. Let's shift to the revenue side because I believe, and that's where I saw the ability to take the economy in the right direction. On the revenue side, the commitment that I came from, the fundamental economic belief that is grounded in me, is it is my job to Minister of Finance as an economist to level the playing field. It is my job to protect the middle class from further burden of taxation increases. And therefore, as any Minister of Finance, your sources to raise the revenue domestically are increase the rates of taxation, something I'm fully opposed to, and we have not raised taxes a penny in all my years at Minister of Finance, or widen the base. What do I mean by widen the base? I mean make sure everybody who should pay taxes are indeed paying taxes and they're not evading or avoiding, and that's what we've been working on. We've been pushing against tax evasion and avoidance in a way that not only got us our targeted revenue, the extra revenue I wanted to spend on infrastructure, to spend on health, to spend on education, to spend on infrastructure. And we saw Jordan's performance during the pandemic, how we managed to walk a very fine line between protecting lives and livelihoods by making sure we are leveling the playing field so that everybody is subject to the law, that nobody is above the law, that the law when it comes to taxation applies to the ultra-rich as it applies to the middle class. And that's all we've been doing for the past years.
And on that question, and so that is like guaranteeing equality and justice, and is that through the implementation process? Can you give us an idea about your implementation process?
So let's talk about what fiscal justice means. Any society needs to raise revenues to run their affairs. It is our constitution that says that taxation should be progressive. Reality is, when I came to MOF, I found that 70% of our revenue accrues from consumption tax, which is by design regressive, and 30% accrues from income tax, which is progressive. And therefore, our focus has been, let's look at why is income tax not coming. We found two key reasons. Evasion, which means people are literally breaking the law, that they are, one way or another, not paying the taxes that are due to them. And within a complex capital system, there's a lot of ways people can hide their money from paying taxes. And we've done legislative changes to make sure that we are able to detect that better. We've invested in databases, in AI, and other tools at our income and sales tax department to detect it. The second part is avoidance. Avoidance is a legal mechanism not to pay taxes by leveraging loopholes in the law. And what we've done there is we worked on it, we clarified it. For example, you have two tax regimes in Jordan, right? You have the Aqaba economic zone, and you have the rest of Jordan. In Aqaba, the income tax is 5% for, let's say, for retail. In Jordan, it is 20%. So we found that some companies, for example, were selling in Jordan, were selling in Amman, but registering their sales in Aqaba, which means instead of paying 20%, they're paying 5%. We introduced new mechanisms to make sure that these are better registered, because let's be very clear. Nobody likes to pay taxes. It's a fact of life. But what nobody likes even more, if you can imagine, is for Lara to pay her taxes or for Muhammad not to. Because fairness is fairness. And applying the law fairly across everybody at least makes everybody equally pissed off.
And when you use the technology, like algorithms, then how do you ensure that they're not biased or that they're not going to miss something? When you use technology, how can you ensure that there is fairness in that?
So, for better or for worse, a good chunk of our income comes from tobacco taxes. These are called sin taxes. They're called Pigovian taxes in economics. They're taxes that are put on items that people should not be consuming, alcohol taxes, tobacco, what have you. If any of you is a smoker, pick up your pack. Any smokers among us? Oh wow, this is like that. Are you Muthanna? Ma'ali Muthanna is a small. Okay, pick up your tax, flip it. Just flip it. Look at the bottom. Do you see a QR code? Yeah. Okay, that QR code brought us 300 million without hurting anybody in the middle class. Because before me, smuggling used to be a way for smugglers to make some serious money that left a gap in our revenue that then necessitated that we increase taxes. That allows me to track in real time what's happening to your pack because I know what's happening to it from its inception till you throw it, and then we close these smuggling packs, i.e. AI and databases and technology is enabling us to apply the law, nothing more. Just apply the law. I, as a government official, did not pass the law. The parliament passes the law. It is my job as an executive branch to implement the law. So I can either implement it fairly, or I can not implement it and then resort to raising taxation in an unfair way on the middle class, which is what we avoided for the past 4 years.
So you sound, from what you said, that you're very proud of the macrostability that you've achieved in these 4 years. However, my question is, how is this macrostability felt in the Jordanian household? How can they detect this? And because sometimes maybe the definition doesn't reach them. How do you ensure that it's felt within every Jordanian household?
Lara, macrostability, in my opinion, is the biggest equalizer in any society. Because the elite and rich in any society have tools to hedge against macro instability. The middle class doesn't. And therefore, when macro instability takes place, la samhallah, like what happened in Jordan in 1989, an event that we all remember and suffered from, every household gets hurt. But invariably, it is the middle class and the lower classes that get hurt more. What does macro stability mean? It means you wake up tomorrow knowing that your dinar has the same exact value, something that, alhamdulillah, our monetary and fiscal policy has safeguarded, that it buys you more or less the same amount of goods, that there is an increase in prices annually called inflation, but that inflation is not really eating through what you have saved, that your savings are intact. And for anybody that doesn't know what macro stability means as a blessing to every household in a country, all I say is go visit countries around us. Go visit countries that lost that stability. See the real pain of a family whose salary did not change, but all of a sudden the prices quadrupled in a month and the value of the currency dropped in a day on day. To me, macro stability is, alhamdulillah, the safety that makes sure every family wakes up in the morning knowing that there is a predictability in what they can expect at the end of their day. However, what macro stability does not deliver is the growth and job creation that we desperately need. It's a precursor to it, but is not a necessarily outcome of it. Meaning it is the private sector that should then utilize this to build on it and deliver it. I think one of my personal proudest achievements is the fact that we were able to save Jordan across 3 very, very massive shocks: COVID, Russia, Ukraine, and global stagflation, from losing that stability. That is not enough. It's not even close to enough to meeting the aspirations of the Jordanian public. And it breaks my heart that unemployment stays hard. It breaks my heart that the services, educational and health, are still not up to what we all want them. But do not mix between losing instability and not meeting aspirations. One is a must for the other, and if you lose it, you cannot possibly achieve the other.
But how can... Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Realistically speaking, and you touched on unemployment, which is very important, how can the public support macro stability, although it's a far-fetched concept maybe to many people, and what do we expect them to realistically support it when 50%, as you mentioned, unemployment, of the 70%, thank you, who are of our population who are youth, are unemployed? I mean, how can you do this as a government and expect the people? What do you need from the people to support you? How can they, when this is their situation? And it's not getting any lower, so...
Listen, let's not mix between our hopes and aspirations and the danger that we can fall into. Everybody has aspirations to address all of the above, but reality is and allow me to be frank, we're talking about the political economy. Self-interest often does a very good job of protecting their interest. And any reform generates winners and losers by design. That's the nature of any reform. Reality is winners of these reforms who are self-interested will fight it. And it makes my life very, very challenging to maintain the course of maintaining fiscal stability in an equitable, progressive way. I think what I would love to see is for everybody to help safeguard that stability. That stability is very, very dear. If you have any doubt, talk to anybody who lived through the 89, talk to any member of the neighboring countries that are really going through a lot of challenges. Doing it equitably, I think, is everybody's job, because reality is the winners tend to be divided, the losers tend to be concentrated, and therefore their voice is very loud, and they don't want to change the status because the status is working great for them. What I would love for everybody to do is to really ensure that if they believe in protecting their stability in an equitable way, to work for it, support it, talk about it. And frankly, I've done some things I'm very proud of. I'm sure, like everybody who tries, I've had my failures. What I really care about is for the next generation to come and continue that direction. Do not take macro stability for granted. Do not take equity for granted. Self-interest will fight it very hard. And if we don't have a new generation protecting it.
How do we communicate this to the new generation? What is
That's
your
why
strategy?
I'm here. That's why I'm here. Honestly, I think it's very important for us to have a general understanding of the difference between our hopes, aspirations, failures, and dangers. And I think that's why I'm here today, and that's why I really appreciate, Lara, you starting by talking about what does a Minister of Finance does, because often very sophisticated people and colleagues don't know it. And I think one thing that this center, and thank you, Hania, for doing it, is educating about that is important. I think the livelihoods of every household matters to every household. And nothing affects it more than the overall national economic policy. And the best thing anybody can do is learn, and read and understand. What we're living through during this time is changing so fast that for me as an economist, sometimes I find it mind-boggling to keep up with. So I think it is our collective duty to really be humble about what we know and we don't know, what we can succeed in and what we don't. But let's make it very clear. There is a long path to where we need to go, and that path doesn't get started by ignoring the problem or letting those who are self-interested take us in a different direction. And for us to continue the path, I need your support. I need your guidance when my policies are not delivering what your aspirations are. Also, I need your protection when my policies are being challenged by self-interest.
Thank you. I think it's, from what we're talking about, it's important that now that you need their guidance, we need to know how to reach out to you, because the Minister of Finance is always a far-fetched, it has this perception that it's not easy to reach, and the citizens, maybe a communication with the people to make it more digestible for them to understand these important points in a very ordinary way for us to be able to digest. I think this is missing, because this is important, but for us to put it in everyday language, it maybe will make us appreciate, like you're saying, where we stand in the region, which I believe the majority do, but sometimes, according to the challenges, the winners and the losers, it can get complex. So if we move and shift gears to the IMF now.
Can I make a comment on that beforehand?
Please.
You know, I came to policy from the world of academia. And in academia, things are simple. You know, equations are very clean on paper. You run your complex mathematical models. They add up or they don't. The outcomes are, obvious. And therefore, I came to this really, and now I have the humility to know that I should have done a better job communicating. Because I believed good policies yield all good outcomes that people should see and support. I was very naive in taking it from A to Z without understanding that I need to do a better job communicating openly about it. And part of why I'm here today really is to try to rectify that, because there is a lot that we can, as Jordanians, be proud of. That doesn't mean that we've even started achieving what we aspire to. But again, there's a lot that we've delivered that I am personally proud of in a progressive way. And I think we need to have such open communications more often. Sadly, the landscape is often dominated by self-interest that is misrepresenting it. That's why I think this center is doing all of us a great service by us sitting across from each other and having a frank conversation. And I can see from the looks on many of these people, you have a lot of pushback on what I'm saying, and I'm really eager to hear, learn, and admit shortfalls.
In the IMF review for 2023, keeping the citizen front and center again, are there any reforms that are recommended by them that, especially when it comes to subsidies, that might affect their lives, that you can share with us?
You want a straightforward answer?
Yes.
No, period. Nothing in my IMF program has to do with removing subsidies. The IMF program is part of an overall economic plan for Jordan. The IMF program, the reason it is successful, it is actually the most successful program the IMF has out of any countries, is because it was 100% made in Jordan, by Jordanian hands for Jordanians, after diagnosing the binding constraints that we're facing. We did not wait for the IMF to come and impose on us. If we did, that program would be all removing subsidies and lifting taxes. So let me answer it very clearly. I know you like a clear answer. No removal of subsidies, no tax increase, period.
Okay, so we'll move on to something else around the fiscal consolidation. Studies have shown that more fiscal consolidation means debt numbers will go up and not down. How does IMF's advice and program in Jordan reflect this analysis? And another side question would be, how did it make sure that it adequately is protecting those that need it the most?
That's what?
Adequately is protecting those that need it the most.
Noted. Listen, I believe in what you just said. Fiscal consolidation, just in plain English, when you're spending, like any household, more than you're making, you have to borrow for that. When you start borrowing too much, you have to finance that by paying more and more interest, right? And that gets you in trouble. So fiscal consolidation is basically trying to bring your revenue close to your expenditure so that you don't get yourself into fiscal trouble. I believe, and the way we designed the program with the IMF that we're currently under strongly reflects the statement you said. It doesn't raise taxes. It strongly believes in bringing debt down, but it believes in doing that through either growth positive or growth neutral ways. That is, when you raise taxes, you're hurting growth. That's why we're avoiding it. When you cut capex is capital expenditure, money the government spends on building hospitals, schools, bridges, all the public services we have. That's also a good contributor to growth. You're also hurting growth, and that's why we've increased it significantly over the past 4 years. One of the easiest ways any country can fall into in cutting achieving fiscal consolidation is to cut its social protection programs. One thing we put on ourselves as a condition with the IMF program is a floor on social spending. That is, how much should Jordan spend each year on social spending and protection should not drop below a certain floor. In fact, I more than doubled the allocation for the National Aid Fund since 2019. It used to be around 101, I believe. It's now 244 million. Add to it what we spend on education, what we spend on health, what we spend on others. I believe it is the job of the Minister of Finance to make sure everybody has a chance to improve their livelihoods. I believe it is my job to help the weak. I believe it is my job to help the vulnerable. And I believe it is my job to do that in a way that protects growth, not at the expense of growth.
So on the topic of IMF still, the impact of IMF loans has been widely debated. Some critics argue that this safety net, where IMF can bail out member countries, delays needed reforms, and creates long-term dependency. Do you agree? Do you think that IMF money makes borrowing countries lazy?
Well, there are two things. There is lazy, and let's talk about the relief. When you talk about lazy, countries can depend on the IMF to come after they fail and give them the prescription to do. Usually it's one size fits all. Usually it doesn't work. So yes, that makes some countries lazy. In Jordan, we didn't wait for that. We went to the IMF in 2019, before the pandemic, and we said, this is what we believe. I've done a lot of work in academia. I've done a lot of work at the Royal Court. We worked with the Harvard Growth Lab to try to diagnose what's holding back growth. Why are jobs not being created in Jordan? Why are people not happy? Why are people not satisfied with their life? What can the government do to alleviate that and to start to facilitate it? We built a program around it. We went to the IMF and said we want to implement it. The IMF is often called, well, not often called, but one of my professors used to call the IMF the airbag in your steering wheel in your car. It blows up in your face. It hurts like hell to save your life, which it does, but it hurts. But keep in mind, it only blows up in your face after you crashed, not before. You crashed. The IMF did not crash you. In Jordan, we didn't wait either to crash or for the IMF to come. We said, we want to fix the way things are going before many countries had to do that because of the pandemic. Now, let's talk about the money from the IMF. The money from the IMF is a signaling device. It signals to investors this country is safe to lend at a lower rate, and that's why countries that have good outcomes with the IMF are able to borrow at lower rates. For example, in spite of 10 or 12 Fed now raises, Fed Reserve of interest rate, we issued our last Eurobond at 7.5%. Countries around us, which has multiples of our resources, are currently borrowing at 20%. The difference between 7.5 and 20 is money that I'm directing to education, health, infrastructure, rather than directing it as interest outside of Jordan.
So that gives me a segue into my next question, which is about women and youth, but mainly women. In one of your quotes, and I've watched your interviews, a few of them, you've said, we are the best on, and maybe it's not accurately, but you say something on the lines of, we are the best on earth in educating our girls and the worst in getting our women into the labor force. I don't really recall you offer a concrete solution in moving the dial to increase female economic participation, although we are the number one in the Arab world in terms of literacy rate, and we are the number one, the lowest non-war country in the world in terms of economic participation. However, 78% of the 34% unemployed women have an academic degree. So it's mind-baffling. And you just mentioned that you did this diagnostic lab in 2019 to figure out how we can, ensure this growth. As an economist, and this is my opportunity to ask you this question, especially that there's an ILO study that shows that closing the gender workforce gap can increase the GDP of a country by an average of 25%. And in Jordan's case, according to this study, it could increase it by 12 billion. So I just want to ask you, as an economist, as a scholar, just as if you had this opportunity to suggest one solution, a tangible action that would allow for an increase in female participation, what would it be? Anything that can actually see that 14% go up. There's so much work in civil society on the ground that we have to give justice, so much work, legislative reform, you name it. But we haven't been able to shift that dial.
Lara, I talk about women employment often in my meetings because as an economist, not as a minister of finance, because it's not part of my prescriptions, tools, or daily business to address. But as an economist, I feel very strongly about. In fact, sometimes I feel ashamed as a policymaker that Jordan has one of the lowest female participation in the labor force. It doesn't add up. We have some of the best literacy among girls, one of the worst female participation among women. And I ask that question not because I come with a ready solution. I ask this question because how come we're not talking about it every day of our life in Jordan? I mean, you want to talk about improving people's standards of living? You can increase as much as you want existing salaries, which overwhelmingly tend to be male salaries in a household. That will increase what, 5-10%? or you can increase it by 100% by bringing a secondary income when a female enters the labor force. So I strongly believe in that, yet I am humble enough to know that we know very little collectively about what's driving it. Some of the work we've done pointed to, frankly, obvious reasons, such as accessibility to affordable, safe, predictable public transportation. That turns out to be very important. For example, one of the studies I've done before joining government showed that a married woman has a radius of work 1/3 of that of a single man in Jordan, i.e. she needs to work close to home. So public transportation matters. Another fact is childcare facilities and what have you. An obvious one is equal rights and protection in the legal code for labor. But these are boring. We know them. What worries me is we don't know enough about what's going on so that we can do the right interventions. Within MOF, I have very little as expenditure and revenue to do. We've adjusted the public procurement by giving companies that are led by female leaders, either in the boards or in the CEO position, what have you, higher points for public procurement to encourage companies to do it. I'm happy to explore other ideas. Listen, reality is we know very little about how to move it forward. And the reason I raise it is because I want to hear from you. I am your Minister of Finance. If you have ideas about how I can use my revenue and expenditure to drive that forward, or how can other ministers drive it forward, let's have an open conversation. The question needs to be asked, not because we need to pontificate about the solution, but because how dare we not talk about it?
If you could suggest a study, as an economist, not as a Minister of Finance, to better understand, because you said we don't know, for us to know, what would you propose as a study that would give us a better assessment of what is happening? Because there is no sense of urgency. You said we need to be asking this every day, but we do not feel the sense of urgency. What a lost investment it is for us to have such a high rate of women in education, but we gain this back from them.
I was having a dinner a couple of days ago in which I proposed the following. I said, let's take 1,000 small and medium enterprises in Jordan. Tell them, for 500 of them, randomly pick 500 of the 1,000, tell them if you employ X% of women in your workforce, you will pay less income tax. And they don't give that for the others. And let 3 years pass. And let's see, does that increase female participation in the labor? Can we use fiscal incentives to drive female employment? That's a great study. What I just described, for all of you who are not aware of it, is called RCT, Randomized Control Trial. It is the gold standard in policy making to see if a policy intervention works. It's like when you have a control group and a medicated group and to see the difference of an intervention. If that works, let's make it our national policy that I introduce bonus points on income tax or sales tax for companies that are actively employing women. As a Minister of Finance, that will piss me off. As an economist, that would be the best decision I ever take.
So that's like 2 decisions in one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So just to shift into academia as a final part, because I know that you're all eager to ask questions. Transitioning from academia to policymakers since 2019, you mentioned, and I guess you feel at home here because it's a university, we were just discussing that outside. You did touch on it earlier, but I want to ask you again, what would you do differently today with what you knew back then? What is the difference between theory and reality to you with all the wealth of experience that you have?
Listen, I was blessed since grade 6 to jump from one scholarship to another to attain my degrees. In the world of academia, you live in a very safe, beautiful setting where you hypothesize about what's going on. And to you, on paper, 1 + 1 = 2 very clearly. In the world of policy, 1 + 1 only equals 2 if you're able to implement it. And that's called the political economy. We take in academia for granted our ability to implement things. But in the world of policy, it's a fight. I used an expression talking to the IMF one time a year and a half ago. I said every bit of reform we pushed in Jordan was a D-Day, was like the Normandy landing. It was bloody, It was brutal. It took a lot of planning. It took a lot of sequencing. Reform is very, very hard because self-interest will always fight it. I wish if I've known that in academia. I'm much, much more humble now. I know that 1 + 1 only equals 2 if I spent enough time to make sure that I'm able to implement it. I am more humble now knowing that even if it equals 2 and I'm able to implement it, if I don't communicate it to the public, I have failed. I should have done more of that before. And frankly, I had the luxury back then of coming from an academic background where I spent a lot of time away from political forces, away from self-interest. I don't come from a politicized family. This is my sister, by the way. I don't come from a politicized family. I come from learning, studying, doing hard work. And I'm glad for that, because it enabled me to look at things without the discrimination of believed knowledge that may or may not be true. What I really know now is you need the knowledge of both parts. Listen, I've always wanted to do public service because I always believed I've studied, I've learned tools to contribute to it. I don't do it because it's fun, it's hell. It's literally hell. You don't see your family, your blood pressure is over the roof, you take all the medications in the sun, and everybody across from you is pissed at you. But you do it because it is service. Because the difference between Jordan and country X nearby or country Y nearby, or let's call them country E or country L, is that our citizens' livelihood was protected because we did the sound policies. Their livelihoods is getting butchered. I was in country E a few days ago where I had the driver literally cry to me because his salary that he received a year ago and he's still receiving today can no longer put food on the table because food prices increased by 50% overnight. Our inflation in Jordan last year was 4.2. This year it's expected to be 3.8. Alhamdulillah.
I'm just curious, since you're from the academia, and it will be very interesting if you would go around Jordan to listen to youth, like a listening campaign, because you're very receptive and you're here and you're waiting for the answers from the questions from the audience. Have you ever considered like a road trip around Jordan to listen to the youth and their problems and what they need in terms of to understand what you're talking about today and why it's important, how they can contribute? And this takes me to the question, because I know that your son is here as well. If you go back in time and you're 18, would you follow the same career or would you change something? I know that you believe in public policy, but if you wake up tomorrow and you're 18 and you have to continue this journey, would you do the same? What would you change?
In a heartbeat. I wouldn't change anything. I would do the failures before I do the successes.
What are the failures?
The failures that I mentioned to you.
Other than communicating.
Communicating is a failure. Having the naivety to believe that if it's a good policy, people will support it because it's obvious, not paying attention to private self-interest, that will fight it. Not communicating in simple, plain language. And really, these are the failures I regret. But the failures I don't regret is trying to do the right policy and failing to push it through because of self-interest, and then fighting again and getting it through and what have you. Listen, there is nothing. I've done academia. I've done private sector. I worked for a consulting firm, BCG. And I've done public policy. Nothing makes you make you wake up in the morning more satisfied and fulfilled than public policy, but it also sends you back home broken at the end of the day. But it's so much worth it because it gives you the fulfillment of knowing people's livelihood got a little bit protected. There's still a long, long way and hope and aspirations and failed desires and unemployment and poverty but reality is there is nothing that will deliver to you an impact that goes way beyond your household than public service. I would walk the same journey. I would make the same mistakes. I will learn faster. And I will have the humility to listen to the youth more often. I have not done that. And I want to do that. I know there are other ministers, current and former in the room, who have done much, much more of that. But reality is, as a Minister of Finance, your life includes managing fiscal policy for a country, making sure everybody gets their salary at the end of the day, making sure you pay your bills and interest and debt, and then manage 5 massive departments in addition to the Ministry of Finance called Income Tax and Sales Tax Department, Customs, Land and Real Estate, Procurement, and Budget. And any failure is a system failure. It's not an individual failure. Therefore, the room for mistake is very, very limited. So my time is not up to me, but this is something I wish if I were able to do more. And that's why engaging in these sessions, and once again, thank you for this center to bring us together, is important. But talking about the youth, we should hear from them.
Yeah. Before I turn to the audience, I just want to ask if there is a question I didn't ask you that I should have asked.
That's a terrific question. I will stay away from the personal ones. I'll talk about the thing that matters to the public more, which is, if you're so proud of what you delivered, why are the Jordanian people still very frustrated? And what can you do to alleviate that? Do you want an answer?
Yes, please.
I think people mix between safeguarding what we have, I mix with that, and achieving what we aspire for. My job as a Minister of Finance is to achieve macrostability, that safeguarding that this seat you have is still under you. But that doesn't make that seat more comfortable. We as a society, as private sector, as other line ministries, as a collective, need to do what we can to push it forward. That's number one. Number two, there is a dichotomy in the thinking among many people I talk to between the model of economic future that Jordan should aspire to. Many people want to be Abu Dhabi, Doha, or Riyadh. I can't. I'm not a natural resource country. That's a reality. And when we tried to act like them, we ended up hurting the middle class much more than the rich. We ended up exempting the most luxurious of hotels and investment and putting taxes on the most basic commodities, on adwiya, on bazela, on other stuff. And I think, wholeheartedly, we should come to accept that this model is not tenable for Jordan. Our model should be a model whereby we level the playing field, we make sure everybody has a chance to succeed without pre-discrimination or starting ahead of the line, by having progressive taxation that is used to pay for good services, and those who work get rewarded. I lowered customs. 93% of goods entering Jordan today are entering at 5% or below. That lowered the cost for the average citizen and leveled the playing field. I increased income tax without increasing marginal rates. That protected the middle class from what other countries are going through. Have I did within my capacity enough to solve unemployment? No, they're not within my revenue and expenditure.
How much time do we have? How much time do we have to restore and find jobs for the youth? Are we sitting on a time bomb?
We are in a time bomb, not we are sitting on a time bomb. We are in a time bomb. 50% unemployment among the youth is nothing anybody in Jordan can accept. And that's why we are launching one reform attempt after another. But what worries me is not that. What worries me is the break in trust between government and people. And that's why these events are very important. That's why I stand before you humbly and say, we failed a lot, but the alternative was not trying. But we succeeded also a lot. But we cannot stay in this state of malaise where just everything is negative and life is pessimistic. We need to get out of it. We get out of it by talking frankly, by my good friend that gives me a hard time over there, Sulaiman al-Khaldi, coming and telling me, I don't buy this crap you're selling me. And me telling him, well, let me convince you. And we have this good discussion. We don't achieve that by hiding from reality. We achieve that by having an open discussion.
Thank you.